So thank you for joining us today, Angus. It's really good to have you with us.
My pleasure, Amy. I'm really excited to talk about leadership today.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the conversation. So can you tell us a little bit about your background and what you do, please?
Well, I'll give you like just square one background and then
Yeah.
build upon that. So I was an entrepreneur. My very first business, I was about 28 years old when I started it, and it was an arts-driven youth center. And during that season, I was young, I was naive, but I was like really like ambitious.
Uh-huh.
And I tried to do some things. I was swinging for the fence. I wanted to do something big in my hometown. I started with concerts, and we built this coffee shop to front all of it. And then we did a music festival. And we needed 4,500 people to show up for this music festival. We had some really big bands there, so it was a really expensive endeavor. But thunder showers came in the day of the show, and we lost $72,000 that weekend.
Wow.
And for my little organization, that was a lot of money, but I was going to turn it around, and I was going to prove to the city, prove to my board, prove to my wife that I could make it work. And so I just put all that weight on my shoulders. And I was working 70, 80, 90-hour work weeks, trying to prove all these things. And yet I was suffering, and I was self-inflicting all of this pain that turned to drinking and porn and then sleeping around. And in short order, I blew up my marriage. I blew up the business. I blew up my life. And so on December 23rd, I was divorced. December 25th of 2003, I was underneath my Christmas tree weeping, contemplating how I was going to take my life. And that's the beginning of my story, because in that moment, I heard this voice that said, "We're not done here yet."
Hmm.
And that very next week, I checked into counseling, and I started learning about human behavior and psychology and all these things that were getting in my way that were all internal, were all my stuff. Flash forward, I moved to Huntsville, Alabama. I met another woman. We got married, had some kids, and life was completely different. And then I got an opportunity to start a company with a friend of mine that was an innovation association around Fortune 500 brands. So while Airbnb and Uber and TaskRabbit and all these brands were coming online in this peer-to-peer space, I was leading this association for brands like Wells Fargo and General Electric, Disney, BMW, Coca-Cola, just massive brands. And as I'd be working with them, we talk a little bit about innovation or digital transformation, and then inevitably the calls would turn personal. And they start sharing with me, and I just have a knack for people just opening up to me
Mm-hmm.
about the struggles of their roles. And I started to recognize patterns in their lives that reflected all those years before from what I went through. And one day, one of those executives said, "Angus, you'd make a great coach." And I was like, "I don't even know what that is. Thank you, I think."
Yeah.
And I started looking into it. And that year, I took my first client. And so that was 2016, and I've been coaching ever since. So my clients were a product of my own story. And
Mm-hmm.
then as I started learning more about how we operate as leaders and how we think, how we show up in the world, it's been an honor and a privilege to serve over 1,000 different leaders in that capacity to help them be who they were born to be.
Yeah. Amazing. Great story. And so it sounds as though it was pretty much a calling. That wasn't an intentional journey that you took. It sounds as though it found you.
I would not say that my high school counselor said, "Here's the journey for your career."
Yeah.
Yeah, you are correct. I totally believe that there was an organic nature to all
Yeah.
of this on how it all came about. And I do feel like it is a calling. Yeah.
Yeah. And can you remember the bug that bit you when you said, "Yeah, this is it. This is my place. This is what I need to do." You remember? Was there a moment? Or
So two books. One was the first book that got my attention was a book called Wild at Heart by a guy named John Eldridge. And it has a little bit of a faith part to it. But in essence, it was talking about what drives us, and particularly for men is what it was focused at. And it was we all want a battle to fight, we want a princess to rescue, and we want an adventure to endeavor.
okay.
And it, in that moment, caused me to realize like I was living for myself. I was not living to protect or to take care of or to champion my family. I wasn't doing something for altruism to help other people. Everything I was doing was about me. And so this book like took my head and kind of shook it around like,
Yeah.
and that was the first book that got my attention, and it dives into a little bit of the psychology. So that was the first one that got me on this path.
Mm-hmm.
But then coaching, when somebody said, oh, you should be a coach, I found this book by a guy, another Brit named Rich Litvin, and he wrote this book called The Prosperous Coach. And it talked about how to coach and how to create an environment and a container for serving others.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I was like, oh my gosh, I think I could do this. And then I started getting mentors and coaches and stuff. But those are the books that were kind of pivotal.
And so the people that you work with now, who are they and what kind of challenges do they typically face? And I know it's not one size fits all ever.
Yeah.
But tell us a bit about the people that you serve now, please.
So mostly entrepreneurs, and that can be founders. They could own an agency. They could have their own coaching practice. But I also have corporate clients as well. And those are typically my one-on-one clients. I do have a group container for most of my entrepreneurs. But then for the one-on-ones, it's kind of my premium aspect when they want a little bit more protection on their journey. And, I become kind of their safe space to vent and share their things. But typically they're at a place of transition, whether they raised a really big round and they're having one of these like, oh shit moments, like, oh, what do I do now?
Yeah.
And can I rise to the task? Do I have what it takes? Or it's another kind of transition where maybe they're in a place of like, my business isn't serving me. I'm miserable. I'm becoming a control freak. I don't know what to do. And that becomes a little bit more self-aware. And most leaders don't necessarily get there. They just know something's not working.
Okay.
And so they reach out to me to say, hey, I'm too smart for this. I've come too far for this. I know I can go to something more. I just don't know what's holding me back.
Yeah. Okay.
And then that's when the conversation starts.
Okay. And so is a common thread, it sounds as though a common thread is confidence?
So yes and no. Funny you should bring that up. Obviously, that's the topic of my next book, which is Confidence Comes Later. Okay. And there's definitely an element of that, but these particular individuals won't necessarily connect the dots to say that it's confidence.
Okay.
They will have like comparison. They will have fear of failure. It will be imposter syndrome. Maybe they fear that if they do something different or go to some other level that maybe they'll lose what they've already built. Okay. And then the confidence comes from, that element comes in. It's just like, do I have what it takes to whatever that thing is? Mm-hmm. And they think some magic wand will come across or somebody's going to give them some kind of an insight or a knowledge, and suddenly they become confident. Mm-hmm. And the reality is confidence only comes from your past. You can only be confident from something you've already experienced. You can never be confident about something you're stepping into because every time it's something new. Even if it's the same industry, even if it's the same space. And so we really need courage. And that courage is really about a belief in me. Confidence is based on the story I've built, the track record that I've established. Mm-hmm. Even if it's had failures, even if it's had missteps, I start to see those as the necessary elements to shape and form and prepare. Yeah. And therefore, my entire past has been the tuition I've paid to today's graduation. So my confidence is now in my person. My confidence isn't in my action or my task or my goal. That's impossible.
Interesting. I've not heard it described in that way.
Right? Mm-hmm.
It's an interesting distinction to make, but you're absolutely, it's courage, not confidence, isn't it, that takes you forward.
And how many times have you stepped out and got it all perfect?
Yeah, all the time.
Right? Like, oh yeah, for sure. And we make mistakes,
Yeah,
and
totally.
we get it wrong, and yet that's part of the process.
Yeah,
We're weaving in through this incredible story and journey that's unfolding before us. And I like to say that life prepares you for what
mm-hmm.
life is preparing for you.
Yeah,
We think we're in control. We think we're like dictating, like, oh, I'm gonna blah, 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 blah. And it's like, cool, cool, cool.
yeah.
And there's gonna be some curveballs.
Mm-hmm.
And there's going to be some stuff that's going to go up and it's going to be amazing. Then there's going to be some other stuff that's going to come down and that's going to feel, like, am I on the right path? It's going to cause you to question. It's going to make you feel resistance to change, resistance to growth, resistance to the direction you're headed. And then that becomes the invitation. When I feel the down, when I feel that resistance,
Yeah,
the permission is, who must I become?
yeah, totally.
Like,
And
this
it's
is
the
my
courage to keep
opportunity.
going through that, isn't it?
Right.
I think that's
Right.
that's the distinction. It's not the confidence that you can do; it's the courage to know that it'll all work out in the end because
Mm-hmm.
it's
It always has,
yeah, 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 yeah.
right?
And so, in terms of what leaders are facing at the moment, then as a general theme, obviously there's loads of uncertainty, and we can talk about post-COVID, and we can talk about hybrid work and remote work, and the US election is just as we're recording, it's about to happen. Is uncertainty having a massive effect on leaders, or are there other themes that you're seeing crop up regularly?
Yeah, I definitely think it's a big piece because it's in so many layers.
Mm-hmm.
And from a human condition, I don't think that we were wired to be able to handle the amount of information that we're deluged with on a daily basis.
Yeah, yeah.
When it comes to just news,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm just going to leave it as a blanket statement. I don't care whether it's, you're watching it or listening to it or whatever. You can add to that talk radio and even sports, I would say, lines into this. All of it is around agitation.
Yeah.
So the platforms themselves are built to drive an emotional impulse so that you'll stick around, you'll watch more.
Mm-hmm.
And it activates parts of our psychology that are that fight flight type of mechanism and chemicals. So now we're saturated in our brains with chemicals.
Mm-hmm.
And it causes us to go to that fight and flight, and it starts playing out in our life.
Mm-hmm.
And so now we question things, and the amount of uncertainty, ambiguity that we're seeing in the world, and then we try to equate, what's my place in this? Can I do anything? I feel completely useless and powerless, and now I become a victim.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, the information itself, depending on what you're watching or listening, is also causing beliefs and stories to be built in your head. And then you try and lead a team
We're
when
feeling
you
the same
don't,
way.
right?
Yeah.
And now, like, this stuff plays out. And so a lot of my work is really around helping people in their psychology and their mental resilience.
Okay.
And the ability to inform yourself words of power and narrative and identity. And when my clients experience this, it's like, where has this been all my life?
Mm-hmm.
Because everything else has programmed us for other, ridiculousness. And now you get to put yourself in a place of peace, fulfillment, satisfaction. And that level of confidence, and I would say even competence of self,
Yeah.
personal power, is what helps leaders, I believe, become more authentic, more vulnerable, more empathetic
Mm-hmm.
than anything else. And for you, what has helped you kind of bridge your own narrative to even doing something like this, where now you have a show, you have strangers listening to you that could be listening from all over the world,
We don't think
who
about
now,
that. I guess we don't think about that.
right?
I think for me, it's the circle of influence. It's knowing. So, for example, my dad is in his 70s and watches the news 3 times a day. Bearing in mind he's retired,
Mm-hmm.
can't do a lot about what he's watching. And I can't get on board with that. I'm forever saying to him, Dad, if you can do nothing about it, don't worry about it. If you can do something about it, then do something about it. If you can't, just cut out the noise. And I think it's that. It's taking control of the things you can control.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't take control of whether or not people are listening and laughing at the thick Yorkshire accent that I have, or whether some people I have no control over that. All I can do is be authentic and ask the questions I genuinely want to ask, because I know that the answers could serve the audience. That's all I can do is what I'm doing, hopefully, right now. So it's controlling the controllables.
Yeah,
and I think that helps with the imposter syndrome as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because I say almost every day, if you didn't have imposter syndrome in leadership, I think maybe you wouldn't be in the right place, because there's an element of humility to doing that job and leading people.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
I think so. And I think your Yorkshire accent is smashing. When you think about, that imposter syndrome. So some people experience imposter syndrome and it shuts them down. Other people experience imposter syndrome and it causes them to rise up.
Okay.
Have you experienced imposter syndrome from a positive play in your own life?
Ooh, that's a good question. Only in the way that you kind of give yourself. So in Yorkshire, would say you give your head a wobble.
Mm-hmm.
You sort of have a word with yourself, give your head a wobble, and then you kind of look back and look how far you've come.
Mm.
So the imposter syndrome would kick in, and then you'd look back and go, actually, no, I've learned this, and I've learned this, and I've learned this, and I've overcome this, and I've overcome this.
Mm.
So yes, I think.
Yeah.
Have you?
Yeah, like I think I experience it when sometimes even running my own business, there are days where it's like, wow, wouldn't it be easy just to go get a job?
Yeah.
Or I don't have to pay employees and I don't have to cover all these subscriptions and blah, 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 blah. And then I got, this client can't meet today and this other one can't meet tomorrow. And now I have to change all this stuff. Thank God I have a virtual assistant now. She's amazing. All of that, there's just so much. Mm-hmm. And then you get up in front of people and you're like, everything is awesome, and yet I never try to be that guy. Mm-hmm. I will speak with confidence and boldness, but I'll never talk from a place of perfection. And I think that is that humility part you just described. Mm-hmm. And then the other part is the growth part. And this is one of my favorite questions, is what does this make possible? And when I experience something that causes that imposter feeling, and I've gotten really good at sensing when that arises, I ask myself, what does this make possible? So if I'm experiencing I walk into a room and all these people are perceived as more successful or have more money or have some stature or whatever that might be. Mm-hmm. In the past, that would have threatened my ego. That would have made me feel, like I didn't belong. Mm-hmm. And now I'm like, what does this make possible? I'm getting graduated. This is my graduation. Look who I get to hang out with. I've attracted this caliber of the room. And so I belong here. Mm-hmm. And that's connected, actually, in my book, I write a chapter about a story when I had to pitch to the American Dental Association in Chicago, Illinois. And it was a really big deal for the company that I had started with some friends of mine. And this could have turned into a multi six-figure, contract. Mm-hmm. And I was feeling the pressure. And so we're on the plane going over there, and my knee was jumping up and down, just giving me the bounce. And my colleague turned over and he's like, you good? And I was like, I don't know, man. I'm not. I don't know if I'm good. And he's like, what are you feeling? I was like, I feel like I shouldn't be here. I'm really scared to get in front of these people. Mm-hmm. And he said, look, man, here's something you'll never forget. He said, if you have an invitation to the party, you belong at the party.
Yeah.
And he's right. I've never forgotten that. And so these levels of imposter syndrome, when I experience it, I allow them to bring me up to recognize that I'm being brought into a bigger space, a bigger echelon, if you will, to signify that I now belong at this higher level.
Yeah.
And then who must I become? Who must I become to stay here? What transition, the way that I talk, the way I carry myself, the way that I use my influence. And suddenly you stand a little straighter, your chin comes up and you're like, all right, damn it, let's go.
Yeah. I think it's also what's helped me with that in the past is also sort of that you're absolutely right with the invitation to the party, but also not everybody has to bring the same thing to the party. Like, yeah, if you're a little bit different, maybe you've got a stronger accent, or you speak a little bit differently, or you've come from a different place. But not everybody has to bring the same thing to the party. It'd be a really boring party if everyone was the same. And so people's journeys or different perspectives, that's valuable.
100%.
That's what makes a good party, isn't it?
100%.
Yeah. Okay. And so in terms of that imposter syndrome, what is it that you, beyond those messages, how do people work through that? What's the next stage beyond imposter syndrome when you're challenging that and overcoming it?
So what's the next stage that they face after they get past it? Is that what your question is?
Yeah, but maybe they don't ever get past it. Maybe it's a way of managing it more differently. But what's the next challenge? So it's an infinite game, isn't it? You never in leadership. You have very few people go, yeah, I've done it, I've nailed it, got it. I don't have to learn anything else. Everything's always going to be okay from here on out. There's just a different challenge or a different level or a different something. So you overcome imposter syndrome. What do people tend to face next? Or is it case by case?
Yeah, it's case by case, and it's all very fluid, right? And what I like to say is, like, you'd never get all of these voices to stop. Whether that's fear of failure, whether that's imposter syndrome, whether that's
fear of success,
a fear of success, right? Any of those things. It's you learn how to turn the volume down.
Interesting.
It's one of my mentors once told me, he said, you can't stop the birds from flying over your head, but you can stop them from nesting in your hair.
Good
right?
enough.
And it's like, you can't stop those thoughts, those voices, those little gremlins in your head, but you can learn to like tell them how it's going to be from now on. And I used to is a powerful phrase. I used to be afraid. I used to think this made me nervous. I used to lose sleep over things like this. And then replace that with, but now, and then state your course, state your standard. And every one of these, things is kind of like new levels, new devils. So let's say imposter syndrome is no longer a big deal for you. You're like, cool, let's go out and let's crush the world. And then maybe you have some motive of success, whether that be, esteem or prestige, position, power, influence, impact, or money. And then now it becomes a question of, well, now what? If I have these things, what does this make possible? And there becomes a growth mindset. However, some people take whatever that now success is and they translate it from something from their past. And they tell themselves some kind of a story, whether they grew up, let's say, in poverty or some kind of scarcity. That will play out now when they start getting success to say, oh, I don't deserve this. Or what if I just got lucky? What if I'm not worthy of this role, this position, this paycheck? And now we have to start working on the stories that they're telling themselves based on something from their past, which is usually horseshit. And, those beliefs built into their head by their parents or by some teacher or by a coach of some sport they played. And they allow that to dictate what's possible for them. And so you have to decouple them from those old stories and replace them with new stories. And so those become this cyclical growth that we all experience. So yes, to your point, is there something after imposter syndrome? Yes. And there'll likely be something else after that, and then something,
Yeah.
and then imposter syndrome may come up again.
Yeah. New
You know,
role,
and
new devil.
right, and each part is this. It's like going to the gym. And if you really want to have a holistic body, you've got to do more than the same 3 machines.
Yeah.
You've got to work the small muscles, the big muscles, the major muscles, the minor muscles. You have to do them at different syncopations or a different shape. And the only reason why I know this stuff is because I got back into the gym. I hired a trainer. I'm paying a crap ton of money to have him kick my butt. I was there this morning. If I can lift my arms tomorrow, I'll be a lucky man, because we were doing all this shoulder and back work. And I now have a physique that I never had in my younger years, even though I was an athlete.
Okay.
Because I have somebody showing me how to work through these different muscle sets to develop the physique I want. In the same way, I believe, and call it what you will, the universe, God, I was going to try and think of something really woo. Nothing was coming to me. All the woo things.
Yeah.
Something is giving you opportunity to step into something else.
Mm-hmm.
And all of these different pieces are like workouts to different parts of your muscle sets.
Yeah.
And so each one of these challenges or, doubts, arguments, whatever we find ourselves in, is an opportunity and an invitation to work a new muscle.
Mm-hmm.
In this moment, I need to be more patient. In this moment, I need to be more graceful. In this moment, I have to have empathy.
Mm-hmm.
In this moment, I have to not be so self-critical.
Yep.
And then you start seeing how all this stacks up to create the character and the quiet confidence.
Yeah.
And I call it the nothingness.
Just
the ultimate state is where nothing affects you. You have nothing to prove, nothing to lose, and nothing to gain. It's the most powerful person in any room.
That said, if you knew when you were earlier in your career what you know now, are there steps that you would have taken? So if there are people listening that are just starting in their leadership career and they want to get to that state of nothingness, and maybe not have, I'm speaking for myself here, not have the things that you probably need to unpick as you develop as a leader and develop in your career, are there tips that you would share with them to not create the stuff that needs unpicking later?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to give you a dualistic answer on that.
Okay.
One is you're exactly where you need to be right now. Full stop. Stop critiquing your level versus other level, your pace versus someone's pace, someone's journey versus your journey, and just focus on you. Who do you want to be? What kind of life do you want to create? And once you start getting this, and this is the part I wish I knew back when, and I'm so grateful I didn't. So this is the dualistic nature.
Okay.
Part of it shaped me, and I would not be the man I am had I not gone through the shit I went through. The times where I had to sell my house and get out of debt because of a business that went sideways. The times when my wife and I were at odds because I made this big investment and didn't talk to her about it, and it almost caused a divorce. The times when my wife and I were at odds and wondering if our daughter was going to make it through the night because she was so depressed. And she wanted to handle it one way and I wanted to handle it the other way. And then at the end, like, what if she did commit suicide? And then what would happen to our relationship and our marriage? And we had some really hard, challenging seasons in our life that I wouldn't exchange for anything. Because they shaped us and formed us. And because you go through things, you can become more resilient. It's when we hide from the hard things that we're not flexing the muscles, so we actually stay weak. So that's one truth. The other truth is, how can you fail fast?
Yeah.
Who do I want to be, and what do I want to create? So you get really intentional about that and start forming that, write it down, start shaping this character, this nature of a person you want to be. And then secondarily is, because you start changing the way you think about yourself, you'll start changing or exchanging stories. Those things you used to tell yourself is kind of like data into your computer.
Yeah.
And you have to give it new data, fresh, clean data. And suddenly you start believing different things about yourself. You'll start acting in different ways. And when you start acting in these different ways, you'll have different experiences. So the point of this is to elevate how you believe about you. That will elevate how you show up in the world, which will elevate the kinds of opportunities that are presented to you. So if I had to do it all over again, I would be all in on personal development.
Yeah.
I would invest in two things. Unless I had to go to college, I wouldn't go to college. I wouldn't take on that debt and that investment, even though it gave me lessons and gave me some wisdom, if I didn't need to go. So unless I wanted to be in law or a surgeon or something like that, I wouldn't go to college. I would spend that money and that time. I would travel the world, and I would find people who are smarter and further ahead of me and pay them to show me the path. Yeah. There is nothing that will slingshot you further faster than somebody who's already been where you want to be. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes we find ourselves wanting to fly solo. I'm going to figure it out on my own. I'm my own person. I don't need anybody else. And it is the dumbest line of thinking on the face of the planet. Mm-hmm. Find somebody, a mentor, a coach, a guide, and they will get you. It's almost like they will collapse time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tony Robbins would not be Tony Robbins if there was no Jim Rohn.
Yeah.
You know, and you can go through the list. There would be no Brendan Burchard if there wasn't a Tony Robbins. And like we build upon our mentors.
Yeah. Yeah.
And where I see our world is struggling is there's too many leaders who have risen up the ranks, not because of character, but because of politics. Most large organizations and governments are run by insecure, inferior types of personalities that have a bent towards narcissism. Mm-hmm. And they know how to play the games and throw people under the rug and make themselves look good. And they rise up into leadership because people think their brashness or their audacity or their volume causes them to lead. And it's the biggest lie. And yet the most competent, well-natured, well-positioned people get passed by because they play small, because they don't put themselves out there, because they don't rise to the occasion to put themselves into the world, to assert themselves into things that they've been gifted for. Mm-hmm. Because they want to succumb to the imposter syndrome. They want to succumb to the fear of failure. They want to succumb to the fear of success. That's my purpose. Is I am building an army of people who otherwise have been passed by to slide them into this place of confidence so that they can rise to leadership and change the world with a level of audacity that's based in empathy and compassion and character and integrity.
Amazing. And what a purpose. What a way to spend your gift. And so in terms of those leaders, do you find that, I guess people will find you, won't they, when they're looking for a coach rather than you going and tapping people on the shoulders? But I'm just wondering whether or not people are in a position where they want to step into leadership, but they feel like they're not the brash, extroverted, loudest person in the room. Mm-hmm. And so they feel like leadership isn't for them. Do you come across those people, or are people already in a level of leadership and then they want to go to the next level?
Typically, those people don't have the self-awareness enough to reach out to me.
Okay.
And then the other people who are already in some form of leadership, the very small few actually reach out to me.
Okay.
Nobody sets aside a budget for a coach. Nobody's like planning, like, I mean, actually, very few. Only the
As much as
wise
they
ones,
should.
right? Just the
Yeah.
really sharp ones. And so I actually get a lot of my clients because I started a conversation.
Okay.
They engaged in my content. They said, "Hey, I just listened to your podcast. I really like what you said about this," or da. And then I just start a conversation, and I'll
Yeah.
do it through the DMs. And I believe that conversations turn to cash flow. And that's the object of sales. And what's amazing is when someone's looking for a coach, they don't ask for it. What they do is they come in to say, "Hey, I really like a thing about a thing," and it's almost like a little like a little tip of the hat, like, "And please come and help me, but I'm not going to ask you for it. What do we do here? I don't know what to do." And to me, that's like my opportunity to actually lead them. To me, sales is a leadership role because in the exchange of someone making an investment in themselves, I'm actually leading them to do all the things that they either were unwilling or unready for. And I feel when they come into my world, it's the moment when the universe is opening up this opportunity to say, "Want to come? Want to come?" And I feel like it's my role to usher them into the opportunity and show them why investing in themselves is smart, why investing in themselves can change life. And then on top of that, it's my role then to deliver, to fulfill the promise that I gave to them, make sure that they leave different than they came. I don't know that there's enough coaches and consultants who have that kind of conviction.
Okay.
There's a lot of 23-year-old life coaches who are great marketers but have very little life to coach. And so for me, I wish that people saw coaching more often and more frequently with great coaches in such a way that they would want to seek it out for themselves.
And they saw the value of what can be created.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so in terms of, you spoke about Brendan Burchard, Tony Robbins. Are there leaders that you particularly take inspiration from? Are there individuals that you find yourself often looking to? Or is it a case of soaking it all up and putting your own filter on it?
I think there's a bunch of them. I mean, I think of, even like leaders like Desmond Tutu, some of the great leaders of our past, whether that be a Gandhi or whether that be Nelson Mandela, whether that be Mother Teresa. These were not necessarily perfect people with a perfect story.
No.
These are people who transcended self to do something bigger than who they are. There's something magical about those kinds of, I'm going to say, a species of human that I aspire. I want to be in a place where I'm doing more for others, not because I need to do things for others. I don't need my self-worth pumped up by people admiring me or needing me. I just know that becomes the expression of me and my fullest self. And that's the difference. So many times people are doing things for an external reason, an external validation, people pleasing. They are filling a hole in their heart they didn't get from their past. All sorts of things that people choose to lead because of. And those leaders are toxic because they're kind of sucking the air out of the room for their own self. That's not a leader. That's I don't know what that is, but it's not a leader. Versus those who are there to help others excel. They're not afraid of other people who are maybe even smarter than them or even better fit for the role than they are. But they're kind of like these really incredible I'm just going to say coaches, even of themselves, they know where to get people from where they are to where they want to be. Like that's the most powerful leader, is someone who sees you, understands you, and then can unleash you.
Yes. Yeah.
To me, that's a cool leader. That's what leadership should be.
Yeah.
It's what it ought to be.
And you speak about that external validation. And it's not validation, is it? But how great does it feel to unleash people and see them go and see them thrive and prosper based on, even if it's just the smallest thing that you've done, or the smallest, like you spoke about some of those insights that have influenced you, like the legacy of that one thing that someone said to you and the knock-on effect, and how many times you've applied if you got an invitation to the party, it means that you belong at the party. That's come from one person, and that impact on your life is exponential. And I think that is really powerful as a coach and as a leader. I think, I don't know, rightly or wrongly, but that external, it's not validation, is it? But
it's rewarding.
Reward, yeah.
Right?
That reward is great.
I think of it this way. When you tap into your greatest self, everything becomes an expression of your power. Right? It is tapping into source and supply, abundance and overflow. And now what you do is helping just make that shit contagious.
Yeah.
And so when you see other people doing it, it's not like, oh, look what I did. I helped them get to that place. Now in a marketing thing, yes, I'm going to show the testimonies. Yes, I'm going to like whatever. That's just part of the shtick. But from a personal thing, I'm like a proud papa. You know, I'm a daddy who's watching my child go further than I could ever go, dig deeper than I ever dug, to be anything that could be bigger than what I could even be. And that's merely my role, is to help them get there.
Yeah.
I'll never be the parent that if my kid's super successful, I'll resent them.
Yeah.
I'll never be the parent, right? And there are parents like that. There are parents who, you know, actually in some form become toxic to their kids. And that aside, as a leader, as a coach, my healthiest advice is to see your impact on the world as nothing more than the natural expression of just simply who you are.
Yeah.
And of course, you're making an impact. Of course, people's lives are changing. Of course, these things are happening. Because I've put in the work to let go of me.
Yeah.
So that those things could be possible.
That's a really good distinction, the letting go of me, from a leadership and a coaching perspective.
And it's not easy. I'm not lying. It's not easy to let go. Our egos are delicate little children. They want to be coddled. And when you realize that that just becomes a false protection, but rather when you let go in that vulnerability, in that what is perceived weakness, comes greater strength.
Yeah.
And that's the freedom, where I'm not worried about what clients I'm going to get this month or how I'm going to pay my bills. I'm not worried about who's going to like me or who's not going to like me. That's freedom. And I trust the universe. I trust God. I trust whatever the system that is the system, that I'm enough. I've always had enough, and I will continue to have enough.
Great advice. Thank you, Angus. It's been brilliant. The conversation has gone in avenues I wasn't expecting, but it's great nonetheless. It's been really good conversation.
My pleasure, Amy. Thanks for...
Finally, what I want to ask, every year we create a Human CEO reading list. So every podcast we ask people for book recommendations, either something that's helped you or shaped you or you just enjoyed it, because sometimes we need a novel as well as a personal development book. Is there anything that you could share, whether that's a book, a documentary, podcast?
Well, besides my book that's coming out next year, one of the best books I have listened to. Can I give two?
Yeah, go for it. You can give three if we're talking about your book coming out next year as well.
Yeah, well, then I guess that'd be three. Okay,
Yeah.
So Confidence Comes Later.
Yeah.
How Certainty is Standing in Our Way, or Getting in Our Way. Number two, I would say, is Buy Back Your Time by Dan Martell, who's actually one of my coaches.
Okay.
Because Buy Back Your Time is really about learning how to delegate and build real teams to free up the leader so the leader can lead. And I think in this day and age, more and more leaders need to understand the concepts in that book. And then the third one is a book called 10X is Easier Than 2X. Because your thinking needs to be expanded. And with that expansion of thinking also comes the expansion of you.
Yeah.
And we play small, so we only think in a 2X context. If I could just double my business. But if you start thinking like, what if I 10X my business? All the thinking has to change.
Yeah.
The things you used to tolerate, you can no longer tolerate. The things you used to waste your time with, you will no longer waste your time. You will get far more laser focused on building something with more intention when you start thinking with 10X mind. God, I have so many more books. You're a Badass at Making Money.
Yeah.
For all your money stories and scarcity.
Okay.
And then from a mindset, I would say Maxwell Maltz wrote the book Psycho-Cybernetics. And are you familiar with that book, Psycho-Cybernetics?
Yeah, I've not read it. It's on the list, as are many books, but it's on the list for good reason.
That's another good one. Yeah. All those: mind, money, belief, self, and value. And I guess identity would be things. So those would be the books I would recommend for those 5 pieces.
Fantastic. Thank you. And is there anything I should have asked you that I haven't asked you yet?
What was it like to move to Portugal?
Yeah, good question. What was it like to move to Portugal?
Yeah, I would say, and the reason why I love this question is because I think it's the full expression of everything we just talked about.
Okay.
When you leave the country, I'm from the United States. I was last in Nashville, Tennessee. When you leave your country to go to another country to live, there's so much you have to let go of.
Yeah.
And so much ambiguity and uncertainty you have to face. And it's the reason why so few people actually finally do it. A lot of people talk about it, but very few do it. And when we go back in history and we realize so many of our forefathers and history for mothers, I don't know, what do you call the feminine side? Our lineage was based on people who had this level of audacity. And that's the thing I would leave your audience with today. You who are listening, maybe you're washing your dishes, maybe you're mowing the lawn, maybe you're sitting in your office, or you're driving to work, maybe you're on the subway or on the tube. Audacity. Who you are to become will be found in your level of belief and action that you take for you to be integrous with yourself, to honor yourself, to look at yourself in the mirror and be proud of who you see, because you are way more powerful than you think you are. And the world is dying for people like you to wake up and to be fully you. Audacity, I speak over you. Go where you need to go. Do what you need to do, and don't let anyone else stand in your way to tell you can't. And most of all, that person should not be you.
Absolutely not. Yeah. But often it is, isn't it?
Right.
Great advice. What a note to end on. Thank you, Angus. It's been brilliant speaking with you. Really enjoyed it. And I really appreciate you and the work that you're doing.
My pleasure. And thank you for doing what you do. Thank you for creating a platform for people to learn, to grow, and to express. You're a champion.